All right. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. This will be, inshallah ta'ala, the final session from this course. And then we will, after that, talk, inshallah, about kind of the... I'll try today to show you a vignette or two, if you have time. And the exams will be there'll be two timings. There'll be an initial timing that I hope everyone can try and commit to. If you can't, you just email Sister Neda and she'll find you a different, there'll be a second date, but you have to use one of the two dates. So please try to be a little bit flexible with that, inshallah ta'ala. If you're attending the Hanbali course, then you'll for sure be offered another date because they're going to happen on the same night. Next semester, we won't be continuing this topic specifically. I will move on. I will do something different next semester. And we'll come back to this, inshallah, in another semester or two. We'll build on it, inshallah ta'ala. I can't afford to do two courses every semester for the next for the remainder of this year, but maybe the year after, inshallah ta'ala, I'll come back to it. This has probably been the best attended course that I've run since starting. So I'm not sure if it's just because I started yelling at people more or because there's interest actually in the topic. I can't gauge exactly what the reason is. Usually by the end of any course, it's me and whoever is recording it. The Fiqh Hanbali course, it was me and Maryam and Azam. That was it. She attended it alone. So which is understandable at the end of the year when there's exams and stuff. Okay, so let's not waste any more time. So the fifth and final universal maxim, al-'ada muhakkama, custom is determinative. And al-'ada is the norms or the customs or the traditions of a group of people. And people, yes, either المحكمة ومحكمة يعني أي يحتكم إليها يعني يتم الاحتكام إليها يعني you go back to it فهي محكمة ومحكمة it mean is determinative. You go back to it, meaning you're always going to go. You're going to depend upon it for rulings. You're going to depend upon it for deriving legal judgments and legal and Islamic rulings. And this is an extremely important maxim, and it's similar to the one before, where it's not well understood and it's sometimes underestimated in its level of importance. And it's unfortunately sometimes also mistreated. When I say mistreated, what I mean by that is that it is bullied, meaning when we need it, we require it, a scholar will just determine what he believes the norm should be and apply that to the ruling and move on and not actually go to what the norm is, if that makes sense. There'll be a norm, but he doesn't like the norm, or he thinks the norm should have never changed to begin with. So he'll just refer to a previous norm or the norm that suits what he thinks is correct, and then he won't even turn to what the norm of the people is. And that's a problem because when there's a norm, when there's a 'ada, you have to go back and see what it looks like. And then you have to use Islamic tools to judge whether it's going to be effective and it's going to affect the rulings, or if it's not going to affect the rulings. Because not all customs are going to be used to affect rulings, obviously. What the Prophet ﷺ did is he came and he challenged all of the customs, right? Especially the ones that were anti-civilization, anti-justice, anti-righteousness, and anti-monotheism. So all of the customs that the people, actually the Quran is very heavy on what we call al-aba'iyya, where they basically say لم نسمع ما لم يأتي به آباؤنا الأولون إن وجدنا آباءنا على أمة وإن على آثارهم مهتدون وإن على آثارهم مقتدون. So whatever our forefathers were doing, that's what. So because what your forefathers were doing and is happening now technically can be seen as it can be called a custom, right, or a tradition. So making sure we understand the difference between what traditions and customs and norms are accepted and what are going to be rejected, and of course all of this is important. So where does this maxim come from? So the origins come from the Quran, obviously. وَمَنْ كَانَ فَقِيرًا, for example, فَلْيَأْكُلْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. So whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the person who's responsible for the wealth of a yatim, he'll say, if you are poor, then you can use that money bil-ma'ruf. So what is bil-ma'ruf? What is bil-ma'ruf? right? The bil-ma'ruf depends on what is the custom, what is seen or judged as acceptable during this time in terms of the usage of wealth to take care of yourself, or what is the amount of money that you would pay for someone to be a caregiver, right? So this is not something that the Islam brought forward. The prophetic traditions, obviously, the Prophet ﷺ used the urf a lot in our deen and in his life ﷺ, when he did not have something to return to. If the concept of istishab in Islam, one of the sources of Islamic evidence. It's not agreed upon amongst all four schools of thought, but istishab is one of the sources of Islamic evidence. What it means is that whatever was happening before continues. And we talk about that in the second maxim, al-yaqeen, but this concept of istishab is why? Because whatever the urf is, unless Islam came and changed the urf, then it's fine. Right? Whatever the urf is, then you just continue with that. Islam came and changed the a'raf that needed to be changed. Like Islam came and challenged the norms and customs that needed to be challenged and removed them all and went against them. And the ones that did not need to be challenged, he left them. Islam left them all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not touch them. So we have to know what the a'raf were or what the customs were during that time. And that is a whole different study. And that's actually what is absolutely required for a faqih in order for him to understand the Quran and the Sunnah appropriately, and also be a mufti. You have to know what were the norms and the customs of the time of the Prophet ﷺ in order for you to understand the Quran appropriately and the Sunnah appropriately. And then you have to understand the norms and the customs of the time that you're living in. So if you understand neither, then the disadvantage that the faqih is at is quite large. Like, it's a huge disadvantage. If you don't know what it was like back then and what was considered the norm and what was considered fine and the custom, and if you're living in a place where you don't understand what the customs of the people are here either, then you're at a severe disadvantage when it comes to talking about Islamic law, and that's one of the pitfalls that a lot of Islamic speakers will fall into. They get sucked into the books, and then they miss that piece. That piece requires a whole different approach to understand it. The Quran and the Prophet ﷺ's traditions did not address everything. And when I say that, understand that with a grain of salt, obviously, because the Quran Quran clarified everything that needed to be clarified. So that's how the scholars understand this. تبيانا لكل شيء means it's going to be clarifying everything that needs to be clarified, that requires clarification in order for you to function, in order for Islam to work for you. The things that did not require clarification because they were already clear, right? They were left. The things that were already doing fine, then they were left to continue to do fine. So understanding them is important. They were left to the norm. The concept of al-ma'ruf and al-munkar, which I spent a reasonable amount of time on the minbar over the 2 weeks talking about, they're social terms. I explained that and I said that, and then I had like 15 people come to me and say what I meant, and they couldn't seem to understand it, and they were very concerned. I love concerned people. They're very concerned about this explanation that I made. Al-ma'ruf and al-munkar are social terms. They were never religious terms to begin with. That is a very simple phrase. Like, this is a simple phrase that I make that does not require any clarification. This is alif ba 101 Islamic Arabic and Islamic understanding. Just ma'ruf is not a concept that is religious. It's a concept that is social. Munkar, same thing. What do people consider good? Ma'ruf. What do people consider bad? Munkar. Right? So we go with that in Islam. We go with that. We run with that as long as they don't. Right? So we have to understand some of the caveats, obviously, here. Of course, scholarly consensus, all scholars see urf and ada. So it's called ada here. When they say al-ada muhakkam or al-ada muhakkima, then they're talking about also the urf. Urf is the same thing. Right? خذ العفو عفوا وأمر بالعرف. So this is like a Islamically or Quran based command. So Islamic reason and logic fall under all these are origins of the maxim. This is a maxim that is well established. Alternative wording is custom can be the basis of judgment. So custom can be the basis of a judgment as well. And we're going to explain that more as we go along. So the practices of people can have authority in the absence of specific religious text. In case of presence of the religious text, it can restrict an unrestricted one. So it has the ability to do that. So when there's no religious text on a topic, you go back to the urf. What is the ada? What is the ada? How do we deal with this? And if we have a religious text, your urf, your ada can restrict something that in Islam the wording of it is open. It's am. And this is, I talked about this a little bit when I did usul al-fiqh the first time. So you have am and khas, right? So when you have a general term, then how do you do takhsis? How do you specify a general term? Well, there are different ways to do it. Urf is one of the methods of takhsis al-ibara al-amma, the general phrase within religious text. And this is obviously its own field of study. But I just want to understand that in general because it's an important point. And there'll be some examples. So what types of customs or norms are there? So obviously general norms, meaning norms that the entirety of the human race, except people all over the globe, understand and they adhere to. And it's a part of their culture and part of their life experience. And then you have norms and customs that are specific to people in a specific place, for example, or during a specific time. So when we look at customs, we accept both. We accept general customs and we accept customs that are specific to certain people in certain places. And that's talking about in terms of its spread or its its width or breadth. And then when we talk about there's another category. There's accepted norms and then there are rejected norms. So there is the category of norms that are rejected are the ones that contradict religious texts. And technically speaking, if you understand what Islam was a reformist movement. It came to change people's understanding of things, their perspectives and their comprehensions, which is collectively their norms and customs. So there's my understandings, my perspectives, and my comprehensions and my values. But then collectively, when you have a bunch of the same, you have some perspectives and values and principles and understandings, and you do too, and we put them all together and we clump them all, they turn into norms and customs. That's what they turn into. That's what we call them. And then we have ma'ruf and munkar. We have a bunch of them that we all agree, this is thumbs up, and then we have a bunch of them that we all agree, this is thumbs down. It may be happening, but we agree it's wrong, and we don't like it as collective people. So Islam came and basically challenged that. The idea of being Muslim is that you look at the stuff that people agree to, that you agree with, that agrees with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's teachings, and you enforce it, you reinforce it, and you strengthen it. So if it's a ma'ruf, ta'mur bihi, you help them with it. If it's a munkar, they all agree is bad, tanha anhu, you help them get rid of it. And then you look at the things that they have that you don't, that goes against Allah, and then you work against that. You actually push back at that. You islah, that's where islah comes in, the concept of islah within the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ, that's what he did. He came and all the stuff, all the good habits, all the good ethics, he didn't touch any of that. He didn't format the Muslim, the mind of the Arab. He didn't format them and say, okay, let's go back to reset all of it and start from nothing. No. He came and built on what was there. Which you would use it a lot, and people have different qualities, and the people who have good qualities in Jahiliyyah will have good qualities in Islam. They learn because they have to learn what is halal and what is haram and get rid of the haram and then keep and reinforce the good stuff. So it's just a matter of that knowledge. So Islam is not about Islam never wants to come to a group of people and delete their identity and delete their customs and their no. Keep all of the stuff that are not against, that don't go against the teaching of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and get rid of the stuff that do. There's not one group on the planet that all their customs are good or all their customs are bad. That doesn't exist. It's always a mix of both. And al-ada, it's going to be used when we're going to turn to urf, we're going to turn to ada when there's no text and when the ada is a good thing. When the urf is something that is actually positive. Why get rid of something positive just because we don't have it traditionally from the Prophet ﷺ's life? That's not actually a good argument. It's actually the opposite. All right. So rejected if the custom contradicts a religious text. And I'm putting here very simplistically because I'm not interested. I don't need to give a million examples. You already know that. You live in this country. And there are a bunch of habits and norms here and customs that are positive that we agree to. And there's a bunch of them that are not. That aren't positive and we don't agree with and we have problems with. And our challenge is that as Muslims, we have done a very poor job at defining them, at helping and encouraging the stuff that we agree with them on, and actually pushing back in a effective and efficient manner at the stuff that we don't agree with. So, we're running into a little bit of a dilemma now. All right, so some applications for this important fifth universal maxim. So determining how dowries are paid. So how dowries are paid was determined by urf. What do I mean by that? People today, if I asked you, how do you pay mahr? You're like, there's a muqaddam and a muakhar, right? That didn't exist during the Prophet ﷺ's time at all. There was no such thing. If you went back to that time and said muqaddam muakhar, they would look at you, what do you mean? It didn't exist at all. This is urf, this is aada. This is something that people picked up as a norm, as a tradition, and it became how it was normalized that there's going to be an amount upfront and then an amount that was given later. The reason that this was developed is that people were too poor. Like men didn't have money, and the families were not comfortable with the amounts that were being put forward. So they asked for more than what men could actually pay for. So it was like, all right, how much can you put forward? This much. All right, then the rest of that is going to be dayn. So it has nothing to do with talaq, by the way. Like we now use it as like an insurance policy. It's not an insurance policy. Like men have to understand that, because if they put a huge amount on themselves, this is dayn. If you die and you're in debt, you're in trouble. This is going to be paid to your wife, whether you divorce her or you don't. You owe her this amount of money. It's a debt that you carry. Once you pass away, it's removed from the tarika. First thing, it's removed from the inheritance. So if you've written I've sat down with people and I've left. I've like, what? That's what Allah said. Like I have nothing to do with this. I'm not sitting here. It's insane. This is not. You'll never make this money in your life. Like you will live and die 5 times and you won't make this amount of money. What are you doing? You don't have this. Like this is not how you guarantee a woman is going to be treated well at all. Like that's not how you do it. Again, this is not having to do with this. But generally speaking, determining how dowries are paid is something that is taken from urf, taken from ada. Right? It doesn't contradict Islamic law. It doesn't say it's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing Islamically that's wrong. Even though you can say, well, it wasn't done during the Prophet ﷺ's time. Yeah, but it's widespread. It's been practiced for many years. Now, does it contradict the religious text? No, then we stick with it. And that's an important understanding of how we deal with these things. Second point, determining so it's a lot of determining. You can see the word determining there is being repeated at least a couple of times. Well, why is that? Well, because the reason being is that's what we benefit from this maxim for, because this maxim helps us determine certain things that Islam did not come and give us very specific numbers or clarity on, and left it up to people to figure out. And people figure out within the form of customs and norms. And legally, a lot of courts will use what is considered reasonable. If you see the word reasonable, for example, code of law, what is that? Who defines what's reasonable? That's defined. That's a word that's very subjective, unless there is a way which they've made today. Like most courts of law have determined ways to decide what is reasonable. It's based on studies now of what is the norm. What do people do? What do the majority of people do? What is the majority? That's how you appraise things. It's a strong tool that is used today in courts of law and all around the world. In Islam, this is no different. This is again, I share with you these maxims because these maxims predate a lot of the modern and current judicial systems and legal systems that exist in the world, and they absolutely it's what people are doing today, and this is a part of our deen from the beginning. The fact that we didn't manage to practice them as well because of how his history kind of played through does not take away from the beauty of the fact that it's there. So determining, for example, the duration of menstruation and the age of puberty or religious responsibility, all these things are left for urf. It's all of it. So how long a menstruation? So the Shafi'i say 15. So where that comes, that's urf. That's urf, right? Today, and technically you don't really need urf for that anymore. Your medicine kind of plays into that. But that's a part of urf too. Like the fact that we accept medicine's word for these things, that's urf. That's the norm. Like that is the norm, because in Islam we don't have a rule that says you go to medicine. No, this is what the norm of people is. They're going to go to this source for this information. So, whether it's age of puberty or religious responsibility, age of puberty also goes to medicine. But religious responsibility, that's a little bit more complicated. It's not medicine. Like when someone's mukallaf, right? Bulugh, what does that mean? These are all terms that are quite open, very subjective. Very subjective. Go to any book of fiqh, you'll find different opinions within the same method, within the same book. You'll put 5 or 6 opinions on what bulugh is. So, because this is Aida al-Urf, it goes back. It goes back to norms. So, determining the amount of gold a woman can own without owing zakah, for example. Who determines this? Right? I think anyone who attended might have asked. I've asked this question every time I run a zakat. How much? I don't know. It's urf. What is the norm amongst the women within your vicinity? Whatever that is accepted, that's what you're going to do. And that's kind of how it's determined, is by what people are accustomed to. Because Islam, the Prophet ﷺ did not give a specific number to this. He left it to what people deemed to be reasonable. Determining what is considered excessive movements in prayer. Same thing. So when it comes to salah, I don't do excessive movements. That's the wording. It's salah. Excessive, what do you mean? So some scholars said 3. 3, he just pulled that number. He just what the number 3, because it was the norm. It was the norm of his time. Like that was the norm of his time, and that made sense to him. But do we have a specific piece of evidence saying that it's this number? No, we don't. This is depending on what the custom is. This is an important piece. Again, and we stick to what the books of fiqh teach us, especially the ones that have had a lot of time to be argued and a lot of evidence. But I'm saying that even when it comes to something like that, it was left to what was accepted or what was reasonable. And don't overdo it. See, that phrase, what do you mean? Right? I'm leaving it to your common sense, right? Common sense, all of these terms, all this terminology is coming back to the ability of the human to reason, and the human being can only reason within a group where there is a set of values and there's a norm that everyone is a standard that people are held to. Islam sees that as an important aspect of its own law. And that's why this maxim is extremely important. So let's move on. What else do you have here? So validity of many types of contracts. So I'm not going to go into this. I just put that there for you so you know that there's a lot of contracts within Islam that don't necessarily have evidence within the Sharia that you'll read within the fiqh al-Hanbali or Hanafi or Maliki or Shafi'i, and you'll find that these contracts are accepted even though they didn't have a salam, for example. And like there's a lot of different types of contracts where sometimes even we may have evidence that the Sahaba said maybe we don't do that here. And then you have evidence where the Sahaba went to a place where everyone did it, so they didn't say anything about it. They left it. Because if that's how the souk runs and they don't have like definitive evidence that this is not acceptable, they'll let it go. Because in order for you to stop something that is a norm, you need definitive evidence. This is a rant for another night, honestly. Like when it comes to talking about, I was looking here for a wording, but I don't find it. SubhanAllah. When it comes to talking about getting rid of a norm, when you come to a group of people and they have a norm or a custom, for you to get rid of it, you have to have definitive evidence, like evidence that is very clear. Sarih al-Quran wa sarih al-Sunnah. Very clear that this is absolutely unacceptable. And if you don't have that, then you are at a big disadvantage and you should not be actually moving against it. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that modern Islamic preachers and teachers and younger people who are very, all up and feeling very enthusiastic about the deen, and they want to, this sheikh doesn't know what he's talking about, this sheikh doesn't know, because they're coming in and saying, well, they're doing this and I don't see that and this. Yeah, but this is the norm of these people. They've been doing it for 500, 600 years is how they've been doing it. If you're going to come and change that, then you have to have definitive evidence that this is absolutely unacceptable. If you don't have that evidence, then you have to hold back and choose the stuff that has clear, definitive evidence that needs to be removed. We have a lot of that, by the way. We have a lot of stuff that people are doing that we have clear evidence that shouldn't be happening, but it's happening anyways. And actually, those people are less interested in tackling these things than they are. And it's just a very unfortunate aspect of this whole issue. But contracts is a good example. Many aspects of marriage and courtship are determined by custom, like how people get to know each other, how much time they can spend chatting with each other before marriage, for example, or before katib kitab. In the famous verse, ولا جناح عليكم فيما عرضتم به من خطبة النساء أو أكننتم في أنفسكم علم الله أنكم ستذكرونهن ولكن لا تواعدوهن سرا إلا أن تقولوا قولا معروفا. So what is معروفة? What is قولا معروفة? This is norm. This is the custom. So you can meet a lady and you can talk to her about marriage, but it has to be qawl ma'ruf, right? So that has to be defined. So who defines that? Defines that the custom, the norm of the land. So here it's very different than what it is in Syria. Very different. When I got married, it was like a very quick hello, bye-bye. It was very quick. It took like less than 4 minutes. And it was like very, so it didn't take any time at all when I got married. Yes, people here like, I need 3 months. You need 3 months to do what? You can do, I did in 4 minutes, but you could do in 3 months. It doesn't make a difference. But it comes down to the urf. It all comes down to the custom of the land, what people are what their norms are. So a lot of aspects of marriage and, for example, some people like there to be a jaha before and a fatiha before, and some people get really upset. No, that's not not a part of the deen. Yeah, Habibi, it doesn't have to be a part. This is the norm. As long as there's nothing haram happening in it. And that's what the analysis of a sheikh is. What is haram that's happening here? And then point out where there's excessive, for example, waste of money or waste of food, or where there's disrespect, or whether you're asking people for what they cannot provide because it's too difficult. That's what we remove. Aside from that, anything else is fine. People like to express their joy in different ways, so you allow them to do that, and they have customs that they're normed. Like you go in, you stand there, and you say ahwitkum, whatever, and you wait until they respond, then you take the ahwa, and if you take it beforehand, then I've been in situations where I went with, I was young, I didn't know the norm, and I went with someone to ask for a lady, and they give out the bisubu fanajin al-ahwa to people. So he gave it to me, and I drank it, and the guy beside me kicked me out. He's like, get out. Because I was apparently you're not supposed to touch it before they ask and they say yes, and then ahwatkum mashrub. Yeah, I hate ahwa to begin with. That's the ironic part. Like I hate I was drinking it just to get rid of it, so I didn't have to look at it any longer. But I don't like it, so they gave it to me, and I just like fine. I said yeah, and then the guy's looking. What are you doing? This is the whole point is we wait until they say yes. But he kicked me. Yeah, actually kicked me. My friend, he kicked me out. I didn't attend his jihad because I did it wrong. But so these things matter to certain people, and these are just customs, and there's nothing wrong with them. There's no reason to push against them, But a lot of the aspects of marriage and courtship are determined by them. Offering a gift when returning a loan, for example. This is I'm putting this there. This is a very known example in the books of Ashbah wa Nadha'ir, so it's not new. Meaning, some people where if I take a loan from you, a lot of money, I return you, I give you the loan, and then I later on I bring you a gift, right? And there was all this argument. Well, is this a riba or is it rishwa? And they know this is the norm, is the custom. It's like the gift people who are generous enough to give out loans. So the scholars eventually accepted that because it was the ada of the people, and there was no specific evidence to say that is absolutely unacceptable, and the norm seemed to have a reasonable, like it was not a norm that was causing people, it was not a loophole for riba, it was not being used for people to make money, it was just a nice custom. So many aspects of court law is determined by what is considered acceptable or not acceptable by the people, which is also custom. I talked about it a little bit, and I just care for you to kind of just have that understanding that a lot of what we have here today is based on norm. All right, so a few points here. Duration or frequency required to determine a custom. So some scholars have said it's you need a day. Some people said 3 days. Some people say you need much longer than that. How do you determine if something's a custom? How much time do you actually need to say this is now a tradition or a custom or a norm? And that is also left to norm. So determining a custom is also left to custom. Like what is the norm for determining a norm? That's going to be based on the norm of the people who are determining the norm. So there you go. You can make a tongue twister with that one. But that's really how this is done. There's no specific way of actually figuring that. We don't have a criteria. Developing that is a part of the obligation of Islamic law and the state. And that's usually done today, wallahu alam, through research. Like I think we have a lot of examples of research, and we should run something on that, inshallah, within the IDA, just to establish how the critical thinking and scientific method is a part of Islamic law and is part of the Muslims. Like a lot of the Muslims came up with these methods to begin, and they were applied during the Khilafah in many different ways. Inshallah, we'll do that at some point. But really, what I'm trying to point out here is that this can be done by research and by those facilities or even ministries that are just focused on figuring out these timings and determining what makes sense. A custom must be continuous and consistent. This is an important condition for a custom to be a custom. It has to be continuous, has to be consistent. It cannot take breaks. It can't have a lot of exceptions within it. It stops being a custom at that point. So it has to be something that is muttarida is the word that they use. And if you go back to the beginning of this course, you'll find that these maxims had to be also continuous and consistent. Like if this maxim is not applied to all the ways of fiqh, then it's not a universal maxim. If there's a lot of breaks within it, like there's a lot of places where it can't be applied here, it can't be applied there, it can't be applied, then it's not really a universal maxim. It can be a more specific maxim. And the same thing for customs. Customs have to be muttarida. Yeah. And when a custom contradicts language, so sometimes a custom will contradict language. And a good example of that is, for example, if someone took an oath that they would eat. They wouldn't eat meat, right? And then they ate fish, because the custom is that when you say meat, you don't mean fish. Now, even though the Quran it determines that fish is meat, it doesn't matter. for this specific oath, because this oath is going to be judged by the norm of the language of what the people usually say. Like what is the word when someone says meat within this community? What is meant by that? Is fish in there, but custom wise? No. Then if they use fish, they have not broken their oath, even though the Quran linguistically may say that fish is meat, and maybe in logic says fish, in fact say that fish is meat, but it goes down to the norm of and the customs of the people. So that's important as well. When there are multiple customs, this becomes a problem, right? When there's multiple customs in a group of people, that becomes a problem. I'm not going to touch on that because it's very. And generally speaking, in language, sometimes you'll abandon the real meaning for what the custom in favor of that established by custom. Like if there's a word that's used and it has a specific meaning in the language, but the meaning established by custom is what is used for, then you're going to go by that. You're going to go. And for example, what it means, like if someone used a word to describe someone, and that person went to a judge and said this person badmouthed me, right? The example that comes to mind here in this context is, and because I didn't know this, or I had not heard it yet, maybe when I came, is when say someone's sick, right? Especially the younger people, they'll say, "Oh, that was sick," or he's sick," or something, and they don't mean that they're actually physically ill or anything, or there's a monster, and it doesn't mean it in a bad way, but they mean it in a good way. So, whatever the custom is? What is the custom for the usage of this word? And that will actually stand in a court of law, and the person who's claiming defamation will not be able to actually get anywhere with that. And the same thing applies within Arabic. There's a lot of examples in the Arabic language, but I'm just kind of pointing that out. A custom must precede the ruling or the incident. So this is an important piece. The custom must precede the ruling. And because of that, we have the issue within, because of this caveat that we have within this maxim, you have people who get very upset by there being Islamic practices that are called norms, because say, well, Islam precedes this norm. So if this is a norm, we get rid of it altogether. Now that argument is not what this is talking about. I mean, if you're stuck with a situation and you're trying to make a ruling on it, right? And in the midst of, and this takes time, for example, it takes a year or so. Like say there's a case in the court law, and then it takes 2-3 years for this to. And in the meantime, a new custom is established that would affect what actually happened initially. It shouldn't, because it has to precede this incident specifically. It has to precede this situation specifically. The custom has to have happened. In order for the custom to affect the ruling that I'm trying to make right now, it has to have existed prior. So when I'm coming to a practice of people in the masjid, the norm is already there. The idea isn't that whether existed before Islam or not. Islam came and there was a lot of norms in general. The Hajj was a norm. And Islam did not, he just fixed it and gave it the proper timing and gave it everything. So it didn't, delete it. It just made sure that it was properly done. Amongst other practices as well. So it's not a good argument used by those who want to get rid of everything that did not exist exactly the same way at Prophet ﷺ's time. But generally speaking, anytime you're giving a ruling on a situation, in order for the norm that you're going to use had to have existed before the situation that you're looking at. You can't be looking at the situation in the meantime, a new norm, a new custom is developed, and they're going to use that custom on this situation that happened beforehand. If that doesn't, it should precede it. Below. Yeah. So these are just a couple of points that I thought were important. So there are 13 maxims that are generated here. We're not going to do 13. We're going to do just a couple of them. It's the most, in my opinion, it's the most complicated of the universal maxims by far, just because defining what norms are and what customs are and how to is not a simple task, and it requires actually it requires judges and requires people of status and people of who are socially inclined and know what. So it requires a lot of testimonies, and today it requires research really and data to establish them. So the first one, كل اسم ليس له حد في اللغة ولا في الشرع فالمرجع فيه إلى العرف. So this is an important one. It's simple, but I wanted you to kind of make sure you've heard of it. So any word that does not have a clear religious definition is defined by custom. So any word that is not defined religiously, for example, like salah, salah is a word that is defined religiously. A sequence of movements that is preceded by a wudu and a takbir tahram, ended by taslim, yada, yada, yada. Same thing, Sawm is defined by Ramadan, and all that comes with that, and Hajj. So these words are defined religiously, like taqwa and tawakkul and nikah. All words that are now defined religiously. But when there's a word that's not defined religiously, then we always go back to whatever the custom or the norm was for the Arab, which is why you absolutely cannot learn Islam. And forgive me to say, you cannot learn Islam if you don't know Arabic. You can't. It's impossible. It's impossible. Like you'll understand Islam in general, but it'll be a second-hand understanding of it. It's just what you're going to have to be okay with. Like a second-hand understanding of it, because you are the step that is missing for you is the language where the words are defined. Like what the words actually mean it comes from the language and the urf and the custom that existed within that language back then. So in order for me to speak about Islam the way I do and sit here and talk about things, is because I understand the Arabic language that existed back. Like I understand the Quranic Arabic, and I've studied, for example, the Shi'r al-Jahili wal-Umawi wal-Abbasi, so I have a proper vocabulary of that. I'm able to speak it and understand it. Without that, I absolutely should not be talking outside of very, very strict parameters of what I was told. Like I'm much more restricted. And I say this not to discourage people, but rather to encourage them to look into the language a little bit more. We just try to understand Arabic a little bit. Anything that any progress you make in understanding Arabic will be something later on that you will. Actually, what made a difference, and I say this to all the students that ask me, like what made the difference for me in terms of my talab ilm was absolutely the Arabic language, like 100%, hands down. I was like I had a turbo on my car. It wasn't even fair. Like it was not even fair with the people that I was studying with. Like there was no comparison whatsoever. What required them a month to learn, I would read in a day and comprehend what I was reading and be able, just because of the understanding of the language. My father, for some reason, thought that was the most important thing. He was told this by someone, and he was, Allah bless him for doing it. I hated studying Arabic language as a kid. Oh my God, I hated it so much. I studied Ajurrumiya maybe 15 times as a kid. Every time I went to a sheikh, maybe Ajurrumiya, and I would beg them, please, wallahi, I've studied it 10 times, and make me do it again. And no matter how many certificates I showed of Ajurrumiya, they made me do it again. And then so I almost make people study Ajurrumiya as an act of revenge. Like I almost just make people do it because I was made to do it so many times. And then of course, قطر الندى بل الصدى شرف بن هشام شرف بن عقيل, and like going through those and studying balagha and reading تاريخ الأدب العربي and reading الشعر and memorizing aspects of poetry and learning أخبار العرب. To me it's an act of worship. It's an act of طلب ilm. You go and you attend a session where it's just أخبار العرب, where you're just listening to stories of old, and you listen to it in Arabic, obviously. You listen because you're learning. What you don't realize, what you're learning is their customs. You're understanding how they functioned as a population of people. And when you do, then you understand what the Quran is saying. Actually, the Quran doesn't make any sense until you do that. When you see where they were in their minds and in their lives and their customs and what the Quran was actually talking about, the Quran becomes much more beloved to you, much more respected, and it makes much more sense to you, because the Quran generated and developed to a certain degree and is definitely a part of a lot of the customs that exist in the world today. You can credit the Quran for a number of customs that exist in the world today, because it's been around for 1400 years, so it's shaped the human experience, just as the Bible and the Torah and all the other books, they shaped the human experience. So the Quran for sure shaped the human experience, because the Arab and the Muslimin for a very long time, they ran the world economically and scientifically, and all of that went into their language that they put into the books, which ended up becoming a part of the Renaissance and a part of the industrial revolution. So the effect of the Quran is there. The customs that the Quran brought is there. You cannot disassociate what we have today as a human race from the Quran. The Quran is a part of that for sure. So sometimes when you see something like, that's fine, I'm not impressed by this command that is in the Quran, because you have it, because the Quran actually pushed forward it swung this pendulum and pushed this needle for a long time, which is why you got it today. And in order for you to truly appreciate what it's talking about, you go back and see what the norms and the customs were back then. And again, a simple example is when the Quran says, like, وإذا بشر أحدهم بالأنثى ظل وجهه مسودا وهو كظيم يتوارى من القوم من سوء ما بشر به أيمسكه على هون أم يدسه في التراب ألا ساء ما يحكمون. Don't bury your daughter alive. Duh. Like, of course, not really, not to back up people. And then you're like, well, how stupid. No. See, you don't understand. If you understood what it was like living in a desert in 1400 years ago, you would See, this is where the disconnect comes in, because you don't understand the urf of that time. You understand that if you're living back there 1,400 years ago in the middle of the desert where there's no law and there's no ruling, the only way for you to survive is to be able to bear arm. And if you don't bear arm, then you will be taken, you'll be killed, your children, your daughters will be taken, they'll be raped by people, they'll turn into slaves. So you're better off not having one if you can't protect her. This is the thought process that some of the poor people run into, that I'd rather not have a daughter than have her and not be able to protect her, let her be raped by people, turn into a slave, and then all of my, and that be her outcome. So they actually, you think no human being wants to get rid of their own offspring. That this is the norm of the instincts, the norm of creation is that your offspring is very important to you. When you understand where it's coming from, it's not urf. See, people always confuse, the problem with talking about customs is that people confuse explaining them with defending them. I'm not defending the custom. I'm explaining to you where it came from so that you're able to appreciate why this ruling is actually is meaningful and what it's talking about. And that goes to a lot of, that covers a lot of what the Quran is doing, is just understanding that basic idea. Okay. So so examples is profanity. So profanity is defined by custom. I don't believe in bad words. I believe in bad meanings and bad intentions. I really don't. A word is a word. It's just a word. It's used to describe something, right? So but it depends on what I can use a very bad word and the person, my friend, feel really good about it because he knows what I mean by it, right? And I can use an awesome word and just with the context and the connotation, you know that I'm mocking the person. And so I get ism with a good word and ajr with a bad one based on the way that I'm saying it and who I'm saying it to. So I'm sorry, like people bringing me to talk to kids about profanity, don't bring me. Don't bring me, because I'm not the right person. I'm not going to tell them what you want me to tell them. I actually don't care. Like, I actually am interested. Why did you say that? Like, why did you use that term specifically? What were you trying to do? That's what I'm going to go after, right? And I don't really care. But obviously there's etiquette and adab, and certain words should not be used in the presence of certain people. Like certain words should never be said in front of, men should never use in front of ladies or in front of children or in front of elderly. I would not say certain words in front of my elders and shuyukh. But I'm saying that profanity and words are defined. Custom defines what is acceptable and what is not. Defining severe circumstances that would end a contract. For example, if there's a contract between two people, what annuls it? What makes it invalid, for example, well, severe circumstances. Who defines what a severe circumstance is? That's defined by norm as well. Defining certain types of difficulty. When you say the word mashaqqa, for example, how do we define mashaqqa? Which is what we did the fourth. So when we go back to the fourth norm, fourth universal maxim in mashaqqa. So how do you define this word? Is this word defined religiously? Is the word mashaqqa, does it have a religious definition? Not really. So we have to use what is reasonable, what is the norm. And if you go back to that maxim or to the last two lessons, you'll find that I use the word what is reasonable, what people accept. I used it a couple of times. I didn't really point out that it's going to come here, but this is where it's applied. So this is how they kind of all depend upon each other. They're very important. So every word that does not have a religious definition will be used by. So rulings and commands are addressing the majority, not the exceptions. This is its own study. This is honestly its own lecture, like long lecture with a lot of examples. And it's very difficult for me to put it in 3 minutes for you here, but I just put it here so that there's just food for thought for you to think about and just to reflect upon and understand that it's a part of this maxim. This is a generated maxim. It helps restrict it a little bit more. That when you have these rulings are not, because people always come to, what about someone like, what about, when you say what about to me in a question, usually you're giving me some exception to the general rule that honestly, if it happens, you bring it to the imam and the imam looks at it and gives you a different ruling altogether. Don't ask the what about questions in public because they're not helpful, because the ruling is for the general state. When there's something specific happening, there's a problem, then everything is going to be treated a little bit differently and there's going to be a different ruling altogether. So, and that's an important understanding because the rulings are addressing the urf, the ada. What is the ada? What is the norm? We're going to address the norm in our rulings. Right? But so someone, for example, comes and says, well, so children are considered incompetent, despite some being competent. Like the rule is that a child is incompetent to make decisions that are financial in terms of marriage, in terms of where they want to live. They don't have competency. Well, I can show you. I spend time with 10-year-olds that, well, Allah, have more knowledge than 50-year-olds, and they have more competency than people, in their mid-30s. But it's not going to change the norm. This is the norm, so we have to go by what the norm is to protect the people. We have to go. If there's an exception, then that exception can be looked at and seeing if there can be an exemption offered to this situation. Same thing where alcohol is forbidden, despite some people not becoming intoxicated with certain amounts of alcohol or not causing harm. They're like, I drink a little bit at home. I'm sitting alone. The door is closed. I don't harm anyone. It's just a couple of sips of wine. Why can't I do this? Because it's not about you. Like, because Islam is not here just to talk to you specifically and your small little nice habits. This is about the norm. The norm is it's haram. That's what, because the majority of people get drunk when they drink alcohol, and the majority of people make stupid decisions when they're on it. So it's haram for everyone, and we stick with that. And we don't make an exception for the the rulings aren't addressing the exception. And the people who think they're exceptions can't just make that exempt themselves on their own. They can. It goes back again to these maxims. Is something that has exemption? Is there a mashaqqa involved? What is involved here that we can bring you an exemption? So if someone's, for example, when we talk about, so I had to learn this, like I've been learning this in my tazkiyah session, especially with some of the boys, the ladies probably even more than the boys, but now I'm finding it's equally, the things I'm asking people to do, a lot of people have struggles with them because the tazkiyah is directed towards people who have a certain degree of mental health stability and a certain degree of ability to, like, they're able to contemplate and reflect, and they can calm themselves down and focus on something for more than 5 minutes at a time. Like, if you don't have the ability to do that, then this is not going to work for you at all. Like, I am sure that there is a method for you to learn tazkiyah. I don't know it, but it's there, I'm sure. Like, I'm sure that it's there and that someone can help us with that. But in terms of the general ways, it's just what is the norm. We're addressing the norm, and that happens for that's why Islam talks about the parents and talks about the children. Like, well, what if someone doesn't have a parent? What's first? Someone is a laqit and never knew a parent. So what do? We get rid of the Quran because of this one exemption? No, we're going to continue to talk about the norm, and then people who have specific circumstances, we're going to address those circumstances for them individually and help them with those struggles that they have on a personal level, and make sure that we offer them what they need through using Islamic law, obviously, to do so. So testimony of a friend, family member, or an enemy is rejected, even though some will be honest. But in general, the norm is that your family member can't really find they're always going to side by their loved one. So it's rejected, even though some will be honest. Someone is absent is considered deceased once he reaches 90, even though some people live longer. Like, if someone has been away for got lost or left and never came back, or we don't know where they are. Well, today they would be 90 years old. Islamically, that's when the judge can say this person is now dead, give their inheritance away, everything, because even though he could easily live over 90, but that's the norm, right? So we go by the norm. So the norm is addressing what the majority of people experience, not maybe one specific or exceptions to the rule will experience. I'm not sure if this is making any full sense to you, but this is definitely good. So that's where we actually start arguing with this, whether this is a norm or not. That's where we start arguing so that's where we start arguing, is this actually a custom or is it not a custom altogether? So if you start saying maybe 10% of people or more don't have this, then norms are usually higher than that. Like, norms are usually looked at. Yeah. Yeah. Depending on the norm. So I don't know. And not that I don't know. I know the arguments that come with this, but this is where it gets a little bit detailed. This is where scholars sit and they argue, okay, what within their time, what is considered norms? Like, this is what scholars are supposed to be doing, by the way, when it comes to fiqh. Is sitting on what are the norms of our time? What are the customs? What can be considered a custom? What is not considered a custom? And then how to define that. And obviously, it's not just so it's going to be percentages, and those are going to be based on what other established norms. What is the percentage of people who have that? And then based on that, you will draw parallels and say, well, that's the norm for the rest of them. And then if it drops under a certain number, it's no longer consistent nor continuous. So you can actually scrap it as a norm altogether and stop looking at it that way. Versus, for example, example of a norm is you drive on the 401, 120, right? You're never going to get stopped for 120. Why? It's a norm. So even legally, I think it has a word. There's even a phrase for it in the legal system. I forget. So someone once explained it to me. I can't remember what it is. But basically, have even the legal system will use what the norm is for people, as long as it's not, as long as they can determine it's safe and there's enough people doing it. But it's hard to It's a good question. It's a very good question. I just don't have a simple answer for you on what you were. Yeah. Yeah, so that's why I say, remember I told you there's two types of norms, general and specific. So specific norms can be for people of a certain time. They can also be specific for a certain place. So sometimes Araf will be in a specific, and for sure Islam sees both. Like Islam accepts that this group of people will have like the good examples are people of Samarkand and Bukhara and Nasa, Maruz, Maru, and people who they had their own, like especially the people at the time today of Libya and Tunisia and Mauritania, Morocco, they had their own norms of certain behaviors in Jazair. So those norms ended up becoming incorporated into fiqh Maliki, and then it became a part of the fiqh, even though we didn't have specific wordings for it because it was the norm of the people of the time. So you'll find it all across. The more you study fiqh and fiqh that is kind of especially from the last maybe 4 or 5 centuries, you'll find more of that issue of the Shafi'iyya have it. Is the Shafi'iyya don't see it as much if they don't study because the Jadid, because the Shafi'iyya have a Qadim and Jadid madhab. The Qadim is almost demolished and it's a Jadid. But if you studied both, you would see that he made like a big change, Imam Shafi'i, when he went from Mecca to Qahira. A huge change because he went to Qahira and then people were insane there and he just had to change everything. He went to Qahira and he found it very different social norm. So he had to actually start changing a lot of his rulings based on that. Because obviously, rahmatullah alayhi was someone. No, that was on purpose. He just no. He goes to a different country. He finds that the norms are so different, so he ends up having to change a lot of the rulings that he has. That's why you'll go to the madhab. You'll say fil qadimi kada wa fil jadidi kada. Right. Some of it is based on evidence that he found when he went to Cairo, because there's a lot of scholars there as well that he did not run into in Mecca. So he incorporated some of the evidence that he learned, but a lot of it, most of it was just the norms. The people were behaving, especially mu'amalat. It was like this is what they were used to. He used to see it to be haram in Mecca. Here, he can't see the reason for it. People are doing it all the time. Sometimes scholars will say something does not exist. The contract is not there. He looks at it. This seems too many loopholes in it. They're not happy with it. They'll say this is forbidden. But then go to a place, this contract has been there for 1,000 years. People have been using it for that long. If there's no definitive evidence that this is completely unacceptable, they have to run with it and maybe just offer restrictions to it from an Islamic perspective. That's their job. All right. لا ينكر تغير الأحكام بتغير الأزمان. So you cannot, the changes of rulings with changing times or circumstances should not be rejected. This is another maxim that is worthy of a series of lectures. Honestly, it's a very important maxim that is generated by al-'ada muhakkama. The goal of rulings is to achieve the best interest of people and prevent their corruption and harm. Right. So ihqaq al-haqq, وجلب المصالح ودرء المفاسد, establishing justice, bringing benefits, and warding off corruption. That is the goal and the rule of all rulings, is to achieve the best interest of people. That's why they're there. And this wording that I'm putting there is what Imam al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam has in his book. And it's a very important phrase in my opinion. So when we're coming to a new time and the rulings are no longer achieving their goals, what do we do? Like if the ruling that existed back then used to achieve a certain goal of people's interest, and today is not achieving that goal anymore, then what do we do? لا ينكر تغير الأحكام بتغير الأزمان. This is the understanding of the usuliyin and fuqaha. So imagine people who don't if I said this phrase and I didn't say where it came from, then I would be called out as like a bigot and a munafiq and someone who wants to ruin Islam and all that other beautiful phrases that we use to describe people who don't agree with us. But Islamically speaking, what we're looking at right here, I mean, this ruling that we're reading, or this principle, or this Islamic maxim, has been there for 1,000 years or more. Very well established that ahkam, rulings, will change as time changes. Why? Because abrogation happened before. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, not because he acquired new knowledge, Jalla Jalaluhu, but he changed rulings based on people's circumstances all the time. That's why we have all these different diyanat. The deen was the same. Islam, all of the prophets, Islam was their deen, meaning La ilaha illallah. All of them, that was what they believed in. The diyanat, meaning their practices of fiqh, that always was different. The Torah is different than the Injil, different than the Quran. In the Quran, they're different. Like the Quran says that they're different. It's not something that I'm making up. So this has always been understood. Like it's not something new. And within Islam, it's still the same. Yeah, not all rulings in Islam are subject to this type of change. There's a disclaimer here at the end because I'm not interested in being egged. Value-driven rulings are not, such as prohibition of adultery, murder, theft, betrayal. These are not subject to, these are our values. I think there's a big problem today, and I do want to address this at some point in a series of some sort, between value-driven rulings and non-value-driven rulings. They're not the same thing. Principle ruling-based rulings, like, for example, the hurma of qatl and sariqa and kadhib and khiyana and zina, these are value-driven. These don't change ever. This is actually who you are. This defines you as a Muslim altogether. But then there's a bunch of other rulings, like what meat you eat and what animal you can hang out with and how you dress. And these are not value driven. Like how I see a dog is not based on my core values. That's not my core value. How I react when I see a dog. That's the urf. I always tell people, like, isn't it Imam Malik said you can have a dog? Yes, I do understand, but al-'ada muhakkama ya ibni. The urf is important here. Your parents will disown you if you get a dog, right? They'll never come to your house again. So that should matter. There's value in that being the case. And it's not just about what the ruling of a scholar is. There's also customs that is involved in these things. And when you come to a country where dogs as pets are seen to be are widespread, then that requires some revision of the ruling and looking for a ruling that actually suits people. I'll never forget, the old what's his name, Michael? No, what was the old convert's name? The guy that we went and met. It wasn't you, it was me and Khalid Sultan, but you know him. What was his name? He doesn't come here anymore, unfortunately. I wasn't able to interest him, but he's an old gentleman who accepted Islam in his 70s, and the first thing they told him to do when he had is to kill his dog. And he got rid of his dog. And it broke his heart. He lived alone. The guy. And he loved his dog. And he was telling me about his experience and told him, well, I almost wanted you to tell me who is the imam who told you this, so I can go and and he just take the baseball bat and just wail at his car. Like, honestly, this is what you thought was the right thing to tell a 75-year-old gentleman who accepted Islam, to take away his dog from him. Like, he has nothing else. Like, you couldn't find in Islam any sa'ah within the rulings. Of course you can. See, that's the problem. That's why this is important. Examples: abrogation of religions, as I talked to you about. Evolution of ijtihads. Ijtihads are always evolving. It's not what I'm trying to tell you. Go back to fiqh and see the evolution of ijtihad over centuries of Islam. Look at some of the scholars that people think to be, like when they talk about, especially those who are a little bit, Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah is one of these scholars who came up with the highest, he's the scholar who came up with the highest number of revolutionary ijtihads in the history of our deen. No scholar ever before him or after him came and changed ijtihadat that existed before him more than he did. No one. Like, that's why he's called Shaykh al-Islam, because no one actually changed so much of what the norms or what the traditional rulings were than this man was. And then the people who follow him are actually anti his way of thought altogether, which is absolutely ironic. It's one of the most ironic things that I've ever seen. Removing the punishment for stealing during times of extreme poverty, for example. Al-Khattab rafa as-sayf. No hands were cut off during a certain time of poverty where people were stealing, because it was, again, going back to the norm is too many people are doing it, too many people are hungry, so it became almost an acceptable behavior because of how bad things were, so he removed it altogether. Wives do not have to move with their husbands. Yes?
So we can change fundamental rulings in Islam, just like Umar bin Khattab alleviated this ruling of punishment.
Sure.
Punishment. So we can alleviate punishment of zina, for example, or
sure.
Like for mirah, for example, not to be.
Sure. And all of these are subject. Yeah. So.
But for example, you can say that it's not that the punishment has been alleviated, but it was applied to the principle of, the restrictions where this is applied. The hadith said, for example, it will be applied if there is enough food for a person, and then he starts.
Yeah, but where did that come from? We don't have that condition within Islamic law. Where in the Quran or the Sunnah does it say they have to have enough? You just added a condition right now, right? Like, you just added a condition. So why is it okay for you to add a condition and for me not to use the same argument? So what you're saying is actually obviously correct. But the problem with this argument is that well, if that's the case, then we can change everything. Well, first of all, you can't change value-based rulings. We just established that. That's never going to change. Non-value-based rulings are subject to change, but who is going to actually apply those changes? Is it someone who has zero Islamic knowledge and zero Arabic knowledge, and someone who's sitting with who's going to do it? The scholars are going to do this. If the scholars of the Ummah come together and talk about a ruling and decide that it should be annulled for a while, then that's fine. If they have an argument for it. So when the Ilmaniyin or the anti-Islamic arguments come forward, really don't feel the need to push back. Say, sure, if our scholars who are specialized in studying Islamic law and the Maxims agree at the ability or the permissibility of removing a ruling for a specific reason or a specific period of time, then that's what will happen. And this happened multiple times in the past. Like, it's not new. It's like all the examples you gave me happened already. Like everyone that you said there, all of these have been at certain points within our history postponed or delayed or held for a while for reasons that the scholars of their times thought was appropriate for, like was an appropriate reason for it, right? Based on, again, what the norms of the time. This is not going to urf in general, just saying when circumstances change, there has to be some reflective change of how we look at rulings. Doesn't mean that we get rid of rulings altogether. It just means that we have the ability, as Muslim scholars do. It's not going to be a couple of us getting together and voting to talk about these things because they have this basis for it, if that makes sense to you. Because it's a good point. It's a very good point. But I think we get too scared of something that we shouldn't be scared of. If our scholars come together and they decide something, and there's a movement towards that, then yeah, if there's a proper argument for it, then why not? Like if there's a proper Islamic argument for it. What these people are saying is they just want to get rid of all of Islam, and that's and they can say whatever they want. But I'm talking about how we see our own law. Our own law allows us this flexibility. If anything, that should be a reason for pride. That our law allows that flexibility. It allows us to argue, to make this argument when needed, to at least talk about it if we feel that things have changed to the point where applying this head, for example, is no longer serving its purpose, or there's a problem with it, there's a caveat, like you pointed out, people don't have enough. Is that condition important, right? I believe it is, but you have to make that argument, right? Based on what are you making that argument? Based on a change of the times. Now there's a change in the times. People don't have enough. They had enough before. Now they don't have enough. So something changed in time. So we're going to look about changing a ruling. That argument requires scholars of Islam to do that. Like you can't have anyone just make that argument out of kifu, if that makes sense to you. Okay. I obviously put a lot of examples here because I think this is one of the important ones. So accepting the testimony of those who do not fulfill the criteria of past years, for example. Sometimes, like if you go to what it meant for you to give testimony in a court of law, yeah, you had to have a lot of high status. You had to be people would yashhaduna laka bil-sidq. They all swear by your honesty. You're someone of great. Back in the day, if you walked around without a hat on your head as a man, shahadatak marduda fil mahkama. If you walked with your wife beside you, shahadatak marduda fil mahkama. These are norms of their times because it's how you gauged a man's integrity. Today, it's not the same thing. So we don't use the criteria of past jurors, for example, for testimony. Yes. Oh yeah, so wives don't have to move with their husbands from the city they were married in. This is an aspect. Again, this is a part. Like this was added. Again, this is an old ruling. It's not new. Like this go back to الكتاب هاي المقري. Imam al-Maqri. This is like maybe 1,000 years ago. He pointed out that someone like a wife, if she's married, because wives traditionally Islamically, wherever the man goes, if he's the breadwinner, wherever he goes, she goes with him because he's going to live wherever he's going to be working. But because of the fear, this is the reasoning behind it, is that there became a norm of women going with their husbands far away and then being mazloom, being mistreated. They have no one to protect them. They have no one to take care of them. They are stranded. They live a horrible life. It happened too many times. So Islam, based on this urf, said, okay, no, if she's going to marry her, she has the right to say, I'm not leaving the city where you married me. Like I'll stay where I am. And meaning he can't force, or he can't use, well, I married you, I'm your husband. There's ta'ah here bil ma'ruf, because in Islam, remember this? I didn't talk about this, but this is because it'll obviously just make people hear. Ta'ah bil ma'ruf, like within marriage is a ta'ah bil ma'ruf, meaning she obeys her husband bil ma'ruf. The word is what? bil-ma'ruf, meaning based on the norm, based on what the custom is. The custom defines what that means to begin with. So it's based on something that is very much attached to the traditions of the place that you're living in. So the ma'ruf became that if he tells her, come with me to another country, she can say no, because this is not ta'a bil-ma'ruf. This is not ma'ruf. I can't be removed from where I live. Right? That makes sense. So this is a part. Anyways, yeah. All right. Uthman's ruling about finding stray or lost camels. This is where maqasid becomes very important. Like understanding, this is where maqasid in Islam becomes very, very important in this this generated ruling. For Uthman radiallahu anhu, there's a ruling in Islam where if a stray camel is found, it is held on to until, and then Uthman radiallahu anhu, because they got stolen every time, he changed the ruling of the Prophet ﷺ and said, okay, when you find a stray camel, sell it and then give the money Bayt Mal al-Muslimin, and the person who lost the camel can go get the money from there, because the people who are holding onto the camels, either they're misusing the camel, they're eating the camel, it's getting stolen from them. The norm of, to you, this is like, what is this? No, this is just a norm of people. This is something that happened often. And it affected people's lives because camels were bloody expensive and they're important as well for transportation. So there's a ruling from the Prophet ﷺ that worked during his time. During Uthman's time, it didn't work anymore. So he had no problem making a shift and changing that ruling because the times changed. And we have a lot of examples. I just gave something that exists in every book of Ishbah and Nadair. Writing the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he told specifically people not to write his hadith. Right? He specifically said, do not write it down. And that's why the Quran is the way it is, because he prohibited people writing hadith. But then we wrote it after he died, after he passed away. So after the Quran was properly established, we wrote the hadith. Right? So why did we do that? Well, because the norms, the times change. People aren't attached to him anymore. The memory is fading. We need to quickly get all the information now so that we can actually enjoy his legacy later on. Yes. Yes, we always consider it with context, always. Always. And as I said, like in all of my other courses, you never can use just one hadith to judge anything, ever. Like you never do that. That's hadith snipers. Never do that. It's not the worst usage of a hadith is just to use one narration about one thing, and that's the thing. No, you go and see what scholars said about this topic, because scholars are going to look at the Quran, all of the Sunnah, how the Tabi'een interpreted the Sunnah of the Prophet, because their interpretation to me matters more. Like how Al-Hasan al-Basri and Ibrahim al-Nakha'i and Tawus al-Makaysan understood what the Sahaba said is more important to me, because they were actually interpreting this from them. So this is all important. Just taking one narration from a book that was written a millennium ago and you don't even have context to it, to me is a dangerous. It's a dangerous thing to do. Not to say that we don't, like we narrate a hadith every night after Isha, but I'm using the context of things. And actually anyone who narrates a hadith here, we sit down, we talk and make sure that they know the context of it so they don't come and do a musibah and say something that has nothing to do with what the hadith is saying. Yes?
How do you, the process of applying this to actually deriving ahkam?
Yeah.
How do scholars combine the text with the maxims, with the maqasid to arrive at a particular conclusion?
So the maxims have the maqasid embedded in them. Right, so it's why the maxims are important, because the maxims are actually the gatekeepers of the maqasid. They keep the maqasid alive. They keep the niyyah important. They keep the important interest in harm, in mashaqqa, in urf, like all that. They keep these things moving. So it's when you make rulings based on text without understanding these maxims that you end up running into trouble.
How do you combine it? Would you start with the text?
Yeah, you start with the text. Yeah, you take the text, and then, so you have to have the knowledge of the text. You have to know what the religious wordings are. Like, what did the Quran say? What did the Sunnah say? And then I'm going to give you an example. I'll give you a vignette at the end, if that's okay. You can see maybe maybe this answers your questions or not. Okay, but no, you have to have the knowledge. You can't apply these things without the knowledge of the basic. Like, this is it's like what I'm teaching you is like how to take a history if you're a medical student. Like if you go in and what questions to ask, right? So this is what this is about. But if you don't have the medical knowledge, like if you don't know how to diagnose things and what you're looking for, then it's not going to help you really too much. It'll help the consultant who knows all this stuff and you give them the information, right? Like so if the medical student comes to me and tells me, here's what the patient said, I can tell them what's happening. He doesn't know yet because he doesn't have the knowledge for it. But if you didn't ask the right questions, I'm going to miss something important. Then I'm going to be in musibah. So then it happens all the time. You walk in and the medical student missed to ask a question, and that question actually, is going to kill this person if I give them this treatment because they forget to ask them that they're allergic to something. And so you have to know what to ask. So does that make sense? So you have to have the basic knowledge of the evidence of usul al-fiqh, right? Usul al-fiqh, which is the knowledge of Lugha al-Arabiyyah and Quran and Sunnah. And then you need this knowledge in order for you to know what questions are important here so that you can derive something. I'll be done, inshallah. Sorry, we're finished. We don't have a lot of time for the vignettes. That's all. So closing masajid after certain hours and denying people the ability to sleep in them, that was completely unacceptable during the time of the Prophet. So the masjids were always open. Now they're all closed because it turns into a homeless shelter if you don't. And people will absolutely abuse it. They'll come, they'll have showers, they'll have food, they'll establish a home for themselves. They take their, they'll make it turn it into, and they'll misuse the space and they'll make it very uncomfortable for people. So we're forced to do something, even though this is something the Prophet during his time was very opposed to. Like he wanted the masjid to be an open space. So there are ways for us to figure this out, but with changing times, it can be changing. So other generated maxims I'm not going to talk about for you tonight. A matter recognized by custom is regarded as if stipulated by agreement. So anything that is recognized by custom, if you don't word otherwise, it will be by default in the agreement. It'll go into the agreement if it's accepted. So if you don't want it, you have to stipulate that this agreement does not include this maxim. So you have to be, this norm. So you have to be careful with norms when it comes to agreements, because a matter recognized by a custom or by a norm will be as if stipulated by agreement. A matter established by custom is like a matter established by a legal text. And these are other maxims that are generated that I'll just leave for you to look at here, and you can look them up if you want to understand more. But I'm not going to go into any more detail because this will never end. All right, so that's the end of the fifth universal maxim, al-'ada muhakkama. So here are the 5 central questions. This is what I really want you to kind of understand when you're looking at it. This is the zubda of this course, really. So you run into any situation, you ask the question, what was the intention? Were there other intentions involved? Were there signs to support one intention over the other? Like, what was the person hoping to do with this? Do I have qara'in, dalil of maybe this person having more than one intention or a different intention aside from what he's telling me? That's important. It's not going to dictate the outcome. Like, none of these 5 will dictate the outcome by themselves. But all of that information is important if we're trying to put together the case, and we're going to be able to use the Quran and Sunnah and all the other sources of evidence to generate a maxim. I need to know the answer to these basic questions. That's how I see maxims. This is my way of seeing maxims. Just this gives you important information. It forces you to look into these questions. So that's the first one. The second one, what do we know for sure? So الأمور بمقاصدها, it will make that first couple of questions. You understand? There are more questions you can add to it, but those are the kind of what I think is اليقين, right? لا يزول بالشك. So what do we know for sure in any given situation? What do we know for sure? What is factual here? What do we not know for sure? What is unknown to us? What is something that is maybe that we know a little bit of? What is grayish area? What is known for sure? What is for sure we'll never be able to know? What is unknown, maybe can be known? What is the default in this matter? Like what is the default situation that we have for this matter? That those questions matter. Right? This is for the second question. For the third one, لا ضرر ولا ضرار, or ضرر يزال, right? Was there harm involved? Will this situation or will this action cause harm? What is the harm that will cause? What is the potential harm that can come from it? How much harm will occur? So all these questions have to be asked in terms of harm. Like, is there going to be harm? How much? Is there potential harm? What is actually, who's going to be harmed by this? These questions have to be asked when it comes to harm. And when you look at these questions, you're going to find out, like I'll break them down once more for you in a second. The fourth maxim, المشقة تجلب التيسير. So what is the level of difficulty involved in this situation? How has that difficulty been treated or dealt with? Is there a necessity or communal need involved in this situation that we're looking at? Is there a necessity, a darura, or is there a haja? Right? And then the fifth maxim, which is al-'ada muhakkama. So what is customary in the aforementioned situation? What is the norm? What are the norms of the people of the land where this is being talked about or figured out? How is the situation usually handled? Like, is there a previous example of people handling the situation before? These questions all are very important. So if you think about it, you're asking, I need to know about intentions. I need to know facts. I need to know potential harm involved. I need to know the degree of difficulty and potential difficulty in the future that could come from this and what the needs are regarding the situation, what the necessities are. And I need to know what the norms are. Yeah, or the context, which is a bit, even a better way of putting it. So those are the 4 or 5 Islamic questions that need to be asked from a legal perspective if you're going to start or attempt to even talk about things. I told you that these are the 5 universal maxims. There are then the agreed upon maxims, the general maxims, which is another number that we'll do in the second part of this course later, inshallah, the second level of this course. The general maxims are agreed upon by all 4 schools of fiqh, but they're not universal because they're not applied to every single chapter of fiqh. These 5 are applied to everything, any situation. These are the 5 things you have to know, right? And then there's going to be a bunch of other things you have to know as well, depending on the context and depending on the situations and circumstances, what type of, is it mu'amala, is it a ritual, what is exactly this? But these 5 have to happen. So when these 5 aren't being asked, when they're not being asked or taken into consideration, when the faqih is not asking about the mashaqqa or not asking about ta'ada, then I turn off the TV really quickly. Like, I'm not interested in any of this thing this person has to say at all. So be careful. And this is what you have to, basically, if you're asking for a fatwa from someone, this is the information you have to offer. For sure, if you can't offer anything less. Sometimes I'll talk about something quickly because I've already answered these 5 questions in my mind about them. Like, I already know what intentions we're talking about here, what we know for sure. I already have an idea of the harm and the difficulty and the need and the context and customs. I already know that. So I'm just giving you the little differences. But whenever there's a question with that, I'll stop and I'll ask, well, what? And sometimes if someone asks me a question, say, I need a 2-minute, and they ask me a question, I'm like, no, this is not a 2-minute conversation, because I have 5, 6 questions I have to ask first. Then I have to take all that information, process it, and then go look at something else. And then it's not 2 minutes. It's not 2 minutes. And I've talked about it before. Yeah, I mean, most of the time we went over like a 15 or 20-minute answer, and the person was too busy to attend, but he thinks maybe for 2 minutes here I can break down for him, a financial musibah that requires like a lot of. So those are the questions. I want you to think about them a little bit. I'm going to give you just these 2 vignettes. They're silly, but I want you to take a moment, if you don't mind. I know it's late. Forgive me. This is our last session. Take a look at these 2. So choose one of them. So joining a foreign military. Let's say you're living in the country and they want you want to join the army in Canada. Or you want to take a business loan and the contract has a little bit of riba in it. I'm not saying either of these are okay or not okay. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm not even here to give you a fatwa. So don't ask me, what is it? I don't know. Like, I'm not here to talk about that. That's a whole different thing. But I want you to think about what questions would apply. Take a moment and do that. Choose one of them and think about the questions. Use the slide before here. When you choose your vignette in your mind, and then take a look at those questions and think, what would you, take a look. Here's the vignettes. Here are the questions. Yeah. You ask all 5 questions. Yeah. And I said, go through them and how would you ask them regarding that vignette? Yeah, I'm just saying, how would you do that for this vignette, for example? If you were going to come and say, Sheikh, I have a question for you about, I wanted, a sister did ask me this question, just so you understand. A sister did ask me this question, joining the military. I got this from a Muslim sister. It's 5 years ago, I think, or 6 years ago. I don't know what she did, but she asked me the question. So these things happen. Like in fiqh, everything happens. Like, yeah. That's what you learn from my courses. No, what I'm saying is the purpose of this is that you look and you go through the questions and ask them and then think of the answers. I'm not saying that I'm going to offer you a ruling here tonight. It's just more of what would you ask? Ready with your fatwa. There's nothing, you have to cover all five. Like you have to cover all 5 points. It doesn't, the flow doesn't, like the sequence to these doesn't really matter that much at all, actually. There's no, you're not building on stuff with the 5, you're just asking all 5 categories. Oh yeah, one of them will be more important for sure. Oh yeah, there's going to be, which is why I'm trying to, some of them, one of the questions will be way more important than the other ones, but they still, all 5 will apply. Like you have to have the knowledge of all 5. But yes, that's why we study it that way. Yeah. All right, give it a shot. So let's use the first one, joining a foreign military. And honestly, coming up with these vignettes was an absolute nightmare because you have to think of something that's not going to cause like a circus of controversy and problems. Because I'm not interested in talking about the fatwa that's going to be generated, but rather just the thought process. And really, it's this lack of sabr of tulab al-ilm that ruins talab al-ilm, is that there's no patience. Everyone wants to just give me the answer. I want the answer. I want to give the fatwa. No. Just you have to learn Islam. You have to learn how to think Islamically, and this is how you go for everything. Like studying medicine, engineering, philosophy, law. You have to learn the philosophy, how to think about stuff, and the questions you need to ask, and then you'll be able to make conclusions later on. And Islam is no different. Wallah, it's the same thing. It's just most people are, because there's an interest in knowing the ruling, no one's willing to give it the time. So let's take the first one. So joining a foreign military. Anyone want to do the first question? What would the first question be? Yeah, so why are you joining the military? What's your intention here, right? What other intentions are there in joining the military for you? Because the person may say, for example, I want to do it because I want to defend my country. Is there anything else? You want to pay off your loans, for example? Do you want to make money off of it? I'm just saying, I'm not saying that that's not going to mean that we're going to say yes or no. I'm just saying that we're asking this question. Why are you doing it? Well, this is my intention. Number one, I want to represent Muslims amongst people. Maybe the intention is I actually hope I'm deployed into my country so I can kill people. Like, I don't know. Like maybe the person wants to go and shoot individuals. Like the intention here matters. It may not, it will dictate the permissibility sometimes of this ruling. Like it'll sometimes have an effect on the permissibility of the ruling of why you're going. If you have the wrong intention, for sure, it's off the table altogether. If the intention is acceptable, it doesn't mean that it's on the table immediately, but okay, that's the first step. So we figured out why this person wants to join the military. The second one. So what was the second question be? This is a little bit tricky. I put it there specifically. So what do we know for sure? What do we know for sure about joining the military? Yeah, so maybe that's important to actually establish, is what do we know for sure? Do you know where you're going to be put or deployed? Are you going to be here or are you going to be overseas? What you know for sure as well is that Islamically it's absolutely unacceptable for you to carry a weapon and shoot a Muslim person or an innocent civilian, right? Absolutely know that for sure. There's no, what is unknown? Maybe that piece. People come and ask me this question, can I go to the military? Ask them, could you be deployed overseas in a Muslim country? He said, I don't know. Then I don't know either. Like, I can't answer that question. Well, can I, sorry? So that's my second question. What do we know? Are you able to say no if they want to deploy you overseas if you get into a certain type of the army? Yes. I know. Yeah, very good. I found out that recently because my brother asked me this question. I had to figure out what's like. You don't ask for a ruling if you can't give me some of these basic questions. I need to know what is. So what do you know for sure, and what do we not know, right? Because if the unknowns here of that are heavy, then they may affect whether this is acceptable or not. If you're like, no, there's a possibility that I end up being deployed, somewhere overseas, and I'm living in a Muslim country or the country of my origin. Yes. So here the vignette is joining the army as a military piece. It's a good, but that's a whole different vignette. No, it is. No, it's a very good one. I should have thought of that one to be a better vignette. But this one here, the vignette that I'm putting, is you're joining as a military personnel. So you're going, and I'm as a military, because that actually changes a little bit of what the questions are and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a very good one though. Just like a look at. So what's the third one? Yeah, so what's the third question? Anyone want to try the third type of questions? So what is the harm that is involved with this, right? What is the harm what is the potential harm? Is there harm? Is there potential harm to you? Is that harm outweighed by the benefits in this situation? Will you be forced to cause other people harm? What level of harm? Is that harm justified if you're going to cause it to people? How much harm will occur from you doing this? How much harm will occur from you not doing this? Right? If you don't do this, what harm will come to you if you don't do it? Are you understanding the question? These are the questions you're asking. I need to know what harm could come to you if you say no. What harm if you actually go? And how much of that harm is going to has a possibility of occurring versus not? So those are the questions. Again, I don't know what the answers are. I'm just saying these are the questions we have to ask. Yes. So that's the question. So that's the question. Are you going to be harmed yourself if you don't go? Is the community going to be harmed if you don't go? If you go, what type of harm do you possibly carry? What harm exists for the ummah? So all these questions are important. I know that you want me to give you answers and tell you what to do, but that's not what I'm going to do here. I'm going to continue to hold back and stand my ground and not offer any answers. I just want you to tickle your mind with the questions so that you can see. Because at the end of this, if you take what I'm saying, you'll write a paragraph with all this information. This information is very valuable. And a faqih who knows Quran and Sunnah and understands the sources of evidence can take that information now, and now the processing begins. Now the legal arguments are built. They're built, but they have to have this information first, because without this information they can't. So the fourth question is what level of mashaqqa, right, is involved in going to the army. Now, what leniency rulings will you require here? How has will not going cause you difficulty? Right? If will going cause you a certain degree of difficulty? Is this a necessity? Is this a communal need? Like going to the army, is there a communal need involved in this? Is it something that we require as a community? Is it something that you need to do? So these questions have to be asked. What mashaqqa is involved with this situation that you're in? Maybe you're starving to death. This is the only way to make a living, right? I'm not saying that it's going to be immediately okay. I'm just saying that maybe that is the answer of that situation. What I'm trying to get you at, too, is that if you said, oh, if I don't do this, I starve to death, that doesn't mean the answer is, okay, then go ahead and do it. That's just a piece of the puzzle that the mufti requires to know, amongst other pieces of information that the mufti requires to know. So be careful before you immediately offer your fatwa. Ayyuhal mufti wal muftiya. Before you offer your fatwa, be careful. Your job is to gather all this information and then actually present it to those who can offer these. Yeah, you say, I don't like talking about this finances. If you know me, what about my stocks? And I don't know. I don't understand, because I don't understand how money works in the world very well. Even though I spent amount of time of studying it, I am not comfortable with my level of understanding it. I don't like it. I don't feel like I have the comprehension of it that allows me to speak in the way that I feel comfortable. So I don't talk about it. I say, go to someone else, because I don't know exactly what questions I should be asking you, because I don't have the proper answers even if I got them. So I leave it alone. So you have to be very careful with what you're comfortable. It's a big deal when you're giving a fatwa of do or don't, of hal or hurma. It's very, because what you're doing is you're speaking on behalf of God. That's what you're doing. You're saying, this is what God said. That's what you did. That is literally what you do. When you say it's halal or haram, you're speaking on behalf of Allah. So if you are not ready to do that, then ask all the right questions and give it and pass it along to someone who's willing to do it. I have to do that. It's a very, very, very difficult and scary thing to do. It requires a lot of study and a lot of time and a lot of reflection and contemplation, and up nights upon nights, not sleeping, thinking about things and reading books and trying to figure out, because you're going to, at the end, because these maxims are what the scholars have concluded that is what God wants. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. This is the summary of all of the rulings he gave in the Quran. We're just taking the principle so these principles are divine principles. You're not studying, like, they're divine universal principles. So the questions here are important, and you're going to give a ruling based on them. Then you're speaking on behalf of the divine. Be careful. So the fifth one, so what is the custom regarding Islam?
Foreign land where the custom for the Muslims would be not to join the military.
Yeah.
The custom of the people of the land.
Exactly. So that, yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So now we're talking, what is the custom of the land? How is joining the military seen? Is it joined as an action of anti-Islamic? Is it an anti-Islamic action? Is how they see it? Is it an act of patriotism? Is it what not joining the military at all? Is that seen as an act of treason amongst the people who don't do it? Like, what is the norm of people? What do people usually do in these situations? What is the percentage of every group of people living in Canada and their involvement in the military? Again, the answer is not going to immediately arrive at the answer and the conclusion of the fatwa, but it's going to be added along to the discussion. Does that make sense? So those are the questions we're asking. So for the second vignette, I'll end with Ben Shell. Sorry, this took way longer than I thought. The second one was taking a business loan with riba clauses. So what is the intention of taking the loan? Why are you taking the loan? Is it expansion? Is it survival of the business? Again, whether if you say survival or expansions is not going to immediately lead to a fatwa, but I need to know, is your business going to go underwater and you're going to lose everything and your employees are going to go without food and you're going to basically close down, or you're trying to expand? I just need to understand, what is the intention of doing this? What do we know for sure? We know for sure that the clauses that have riba in them are haram. That's what we know for sure. We know for sure that any contract that has riba in it is a contract that is problematic and Islamically not acceptable, right? What we don't know for sure is whether do we know for sure that the wording within these business loans are sarih riba, full riba, or is it something different? Like, we have to ask those questions. These questions have to be answered. These questions are most difficult. The second maxim, if you go, as the more vignettes you do, you'll find the second maxim is very important. Like, it's really, really important. Establishing your facts. What are your facts Islamically about this vignette? For here, there's a lot of facts. I'm just giving you one or two to think about. What harm is involved if you didn't take this loan versus if you do take this loan? What is the potential harm of taking this loan later on, in terms of if it doesn't work out, for example? These questions: what level of difficulty do you carry if you take this loan or if you don't take this loan? And there's a difference between harm and difficulty. I hope that has been established as we studied here, that harm is something that is direct, that is measurable. Difficulty is not as, and we talk, is this a personal necessity? Is it a communal need? Is that why we're doing this? Why are you taking this loan? What is customary for the people of the land, Muslims and non-Muslims, when it comes to taking business loans? How do people expand their businesses in general? Are there other methods of doing this, or is it just one method for it to be done? So these are the questions you're asking. How do you figure out all that information now is gathered and offered for the scholar to start thinking about this, and he will ask maybe another 10, 15 questions that are based on other maxims that are generated to establish the fatwa. That's this course. That's the first level of Islamic legal maxims. I hope you found that beneficial. I hope this was not too heavy or boring for you. I can see people scribbling on their boards, so they're completely bored. So forgive me if this was not, it was too technical and and lacked interaction. But hopefully now that we've done this first level, the second level will be easier because you have now something to build upon. So when we study other maxims, you can always go back to some of these ones that we've studied and say, well, what did that, if you memorize these maxims and you can quote them, this is now how you start learning how to become a jurist. You start quoting, well, we have the maxim, we have the specific, درء المفاسد مقدم على جلب المصالح. Well, now and you have an argument now to make about this point, because that's a maxim, and we have to prove that the ruling that we're looking at actually that maxim is being considered when we're making it. That we're actually weighing out harm here, or is there more harm than there is benefit, or are they equal? What's going on, and who's going to judge that? And do we have is it contending, or are they very different in terms of their weight? So you're learning to make those questions, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Please remember to do the mandatory reading. There's an assignment. I don't mind if the assignment comes in late. Most people do their assignments late anyway, so I don't mind. The exam is going to be established. There's going to be a day for it, and then there'll be another day once enough people saying that they like. If you can't do it on the day that is established, email. Try to do it, please. Please don't. Everyone try to look for another. Try to do it on the date that is established or determined. And then if you can't, email Neda, and she'll put another date for it. My exams are open book. I don't need you. You can have your notes with you. I have no problem with that. I need to hear your voice. Like, I need to hear you explaining things to me. This is going to, my questions are not added and count and give me, I want you to explain what's your understanding of what we're, of this. And I establish your understanding just based on how you kind of talk about stuff. So feel free to write. I don't like short two words. I don't like engineering. Engineers have the worst answers. It's like 2 lines. Like, no, it's not an equation. Right? I want to hear you explain things to me. Don't copy paste some of the points that exist in the in the slide, but rather go, and you'll see the questions are all kind of that nature. None of them are memorization. They're mostly understanding. So if you have notes, you're welcome to have them beside you and then kind of remember what was talked about and explain things in ways you find beneficial. And with that, subhanallah walhamdulillah, la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakumullahu khair wa barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.